Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show, featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts thinks covering the slot means barking at the mailman. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes, and I am joined, it's been a while, actually, for, this isn't really, I feel like championship weekend is the best weekend of football, but this is, you like the divisional round, Bill Barnwell?
I do. You get more games. You get 2 days worth of games, and you don't have it's not like wild card weekend where by Monday you're kind of sick of it and kind of tired. You get 4 games. It is the perfect weekend of football.
Okay. Well, then I'm glad that you're here because we are going to be talking about all of those games, and I'm looking at the point spreads right now. I didn't look at them either. There's some pretty big spreads, but we'll talk about whether or not we think they're going to be closer. That voice, sorry, it is Bill Barnwell, the host of the Bill Barnwell Show. Longtime friend of the pod. We're going to talk about every game. You want to just jump right into it and go chronologically here?
Yeah, of course.
Should we start with the breaking news that Deontay Johnson is returning to the Baltimore Ravens?
It
Do you
sucks.
have to read your game now?
I burned my Deontay Johnson jersey that I got when he signed with them the first time. Now I have to go back and get another one. This is terrible.
I have so many questions about that. Suffice to say, it will not affect my analysis for that game. That game, which we are going to talk about at the very end. So you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait. We're going to start with the first game of the weekend. And that, of course, yes, is Texans Chiefs, pardon me. Mm-hmm. It's a rematch. 3 of these games are rematches, which, Bill, I always like because it gives you something to kind of base it off of, especially because most of these rematches weren't from, well, the Ravens-Bills one was from a lot earlier in the season, but it wasn't like last week when we were talking about Bucks Commanders. I started by saying, yeah, you can just kind of throw the week 1 tape out the window. Not the case here. It was not that long ago, and I think it was very relevant, particularly in how the Chiefs approached it. So maybe we can start there. Just looking back at my notes from that game and watching some of Mahomes' best plays, they really leaned on quick game, which is unsurprising given the Texans' terrifying pass rush, which we saw really take over a game in the last round. Mahomes had an average 2.5 second time to throw, which is very, very, very quick. So let's just start there. I mean, do you think that'll be something similar? Because obviously the Chiefs' offensive line has had their ups and downs. Andy Reid has been a bit coy about who's starting at left tackle, whether it's Joe Thuney or DJ Humphries. So before we get to I guess you can address the offensive line aspect of it, but do you think it's safe to assume it's going to be a similar emphasis on quick game, given not only that's how they approached this matchup, but that's really how they have approached much of this season?
I would say yes, but I'm leaving open the possibility that things change because, of course, the Texans are aware. I don't think they were surprised by the game plan first time out, but certainly you would figure they would be looking at what they saw first time out and thinking, okay, we probably need to be a little more aggressive, challenging people at the line of scrimmage, maybe a little more aggressive with our pressures, try to mix some stuff up to create possibilities to get pressure within 2.5 seconds, or at least bother Patrick Mahomes in the first 2.5 seconds. And from the Chiefs' perspective, I think they have some counter punches that might actually make a difference here. You mentioned the left tackle situation. We don't know who's playing. I think we can safely say it's not Wanya Morris. I feel like it'll either be Humphries or Joe Thuney. But maybe you have the ability to hold up a little longer in pass pro, or at least in terms of your level of confidence than you did, if not in that Texans game throughout the majority of the season when it was just a mess at left tackle and you couldn't figure out how much time you'd have to work with protecting Patrick Mahomes' blind side. And then I think the big difference here, something we saw a little bit in that Texans game, but not a ton, was Hollywood Brown.
Yeah.
Hollywood Brown's usage since he got in the lineup is he's getting Nico Collins level of target share. In that game, it was his debut for the Chiefs against the Texans. 14 routes run, 8 targets, 5 catches. Next week against the Steelers, 19 routes, 7 targets. He's getting targeted almost half the time he's on the field. Clearly, Andy Reid thought when they signed Hollywood Brown that he was going to be a featured portion of the offense. That got even more pressing once Rashee Rice went out, and he's finally getting a chance to use him, and you would figure there's going to be more Hollywood Brown in this game than there was the first time these two teams played. So if the Chiefs need to attack deeper, I think they can because of those two things, but I do believe that at the core, it's going to be get the ball out quick, dare the Texans to stop that, and then maybe we worry about trying to hit more stuff downfield.
Yeah, I think to your point, there'll be a little bit of a feeling out period in the beginning, right? And they're going to see how the Texans approach their passing attack, because I suspect we'll see quick game at first, although, maybe play action shot play early on could be in the offing. They did lean heavily on play action, by the way, last time they played. It wasn't that much. It wasn't very long developing. A lot of it was quick balls to Xavier Worthy, right? Like they had a slant. I think that was the big catch and run to Worthy. It was a play action slant. They hit him. This wasn't play action. It was the touchdown. But there was another catch and run versus man coverage off of play action. A lot of it was out of 12 personnel, which the Chiefs used to help in pass protection as well. I have to think that will be a plan in this one.
For sure. 100%.
I am. The left tackle question is really interesting to me because Andy Reid, I feel like, might just be playing it close to the vest. There's no reason to help D'Amico Ryans in terms of planning your pass rush. But, my initial instinct was Tooney's been playing so well, honestly, at left tackle. And when we saw Humphreys, he wasn't that great and he got hurt. But I asked Mitchell Schwartz, our friend, former Chiefs tackle, what he thought. And he said, well, yeah, with Tooney, though, then you can kind of double down on your area of strength, which is the interior. Whereas if you have Humphreys out there, you can give him chip help, which is something, by the way, they did a lot against the Steelers.
Yeah.
So I kind of think I wouldn't be surprised if they actually moved Tooney back inside. But I love your point about Hollywood Brown because I think they still don't have like a group of world beaters at receiver.
Yeah.
But between him, D-Hop, and Xavier Worthy, who's really carved out this role as that kind of a short target guy, you have enough, I think, And so I guess for the Texans, Bill, it just comes down to whether or not your pass rush, whether or not if Mahomes plays that quick game style, I suppose whether your pass rush can still affect him at all. And if not that, can you be physical enough, I think, at the line of scrimmage to disrupt what they want to do in the pass game?
Yeah, I really liked what they did last week against the Chargers. Like on paper, I felt like that was such a tough matchup because you figure, okay, your strength, your two edge rushers are up against the Chargers' strengths. They're two offensive tackles. And then the Chargers' best receivers, Ladd McConkey, who plays in the slot, and the Texans' top two slot receivers are both injured. Slot defenders are both injured. Jalen Petre's out for the year. Jimmy Ward's out for the year. And Ladd McConkey balled out, and it did not matter because Justin Herbert couldn't throw the ball to anybody else in the field. And I thought what the Texans did was really smart. They had a ton of twists. They had a ton of stunts, ton of TE games going on. And they got their two edge rushers on the interior against the Chargers' interior linemen. And that was a mismatch throughout the entire game. Now, I don't know if you have the time to do that against Mahomes. I think the ball might be out by the time those twists get home. So I think now you have to change your game plan to an one-on-one just on the outside straight up. And like you said, the Chiefs are going to be chipping. They're going to be helping their tackles. They'll help Juwan Taylor too. Like I think, Juwan Taylor's not exactly, he's better than what they have on the left side, but he's not exactly been a superstar at right tackle. And so I do think going with 12 personnel makes sense for the Chiefs. The Texans were 5th in the league in EPA per play against one tight end sets, 0 tight end sets. But once you got bigger, they got to 11th in EPA per play against those 12, 13 personnel groupings. But I sort of wonder, so much of what the Chiefs do is attacking the slot, like whether it's Travis Kelce, whether it's Xavier Worthy, we'll see Hollywood Brown. Like that would seem like the obvious weakness to me, and yet the Texans' numbers against the slot are awesome.
Amazing, yeah.
I don't really understand how that works. I've been trying to figure it out, but certainly it would feel like the Chiefs, if they have success throwing into the slot, it's going to be a long day for the Texans.
Well, the Texans are actually pretty good at matching up with almost everything that the Chiefs usually do. Like I know. Over the course of the season, not the last time they played. Like they're an incredible quick game team. I think I pulled up I pulled up the season numbers because I was curious, and they're one of the best in the NFL. Okay, versus quick game, 3rd in EPA per play. They allow the 2nd lowest QBR in football. 3rd down is really huge in this one, right? The Chiefs have been this unbelievable 3rd down team all year. Yeah. Texans defense over the course of the season allowed the 3rd lowest 3rd down conversion rate in football. Which was 35%. But when they played the Chiefs, they converted 54% of the time. Yes. So in that strength against strength matchup, the Chiefs came out on top, in part because they didn't have that far to go, by the way, on 3rd down, which has been the case for them all season long, Bill. I guess I bring that up to say, like, I don't think the Texans need to do anything particularly different from what they do. It just comes down to a strength on strength matchup. And like, your guys making plays, either Will Anderson Jr., Danielle Hunter, getting the kind of pressure we saw in the last round behind that, their linebackers and their corners who are just unbelievable, forcing some incompletions, getting physical with these Chiefs receivers. I would emphasize that again. The one thing where there is a matchup discrepancy, I feel like a broken record on this, but I mentioned in the last round, and it drove me insane because Justin Herbert didn't carry the football once. Texans defense have been awful against QB runs all year long. Justin Herbert did not carry the football against them. Patrick Mahomes will carry the football against them,
particularly against pressure.
Especially against pressure, especially given that he has not played football in weeks, so he's got to be feeling pretty good right now.
So you're just saying out of sheer boredom, Patrick Mahomes just because he's stir crazy, he's going to scramble. He is healthy for sure. I actually think, just transitioning to the other side of the ball here, CJ Stroud scrambling was a big story to me from last week because he only averaged about 15 scramble yards per game the first time, during the regular season, but then last week, 42 yards scrambling and big plays each time. Chargers clearly did not have an answer for it. They were clearly not prepared for it. And if the Chiefs do blitz CJ Stroud a lot, which I would bet pretty much my life savings they're going to blitz CJ Stroud a bunch in this game. That's one way to get out of it. That's one way to scare Steve Spagnuolo, to create some opportunities. There are going to be some, overloads, some sim pressures, and one way to beat that is to scramble. And I think if CJ Stroud does that, that's a way out for the Texans, especially in 3rd and long against those blitzes.
Yeah, they blitzed the hell out of him the last time.
Yes, they blitzed the hell out of everybody.
They blitzed the hell out of everybody, but it was actually one of their highest blitzing games of the entire season. And he wasn't terrible against it. But this was a game to remind people where Tank Dell had that unbelievable deep catch, and then he got hurt, and of course he's lost for the season. And it felt like, to take it out of the X's and O's of that, like Stroud was rattled by that, man. Like going back and watching that play and how he reacted, and I do think that and the Texans offense as a whole kind of fell apart after that moment. And so I do think not having that sort of in-game, event, I suppose, works to their advantage. I do really wish, though, they had more secondary pass catchers, because you have to assume the Chiefs are going to put Trent McDuffie on Nico Collins again. He was on him 50% of the time last time these teams played. He held him to 3 catches on 4 targets for 5 yards and an interception. Now, we are coming off of a phenomenal Nico Collins performance, where it looked a lot like 2023, where Stroud was hitting those deep in breakers to him in the wild card round. Do you think perhaps he can repeat that, or do you think Trent Duffy stands a good chance of erasing him again?
I think they have a shot, but I think you have to be very creative about how you use Nico Collins. It cannot just be we're going to line you up and you're going to get open situation. Like I always think the gold standard for how an NFL offense uses a receiver is Justin Jefferson, right? Where he is in the backfield, he's in the slot, he's in bunches. And something the Chiefs do struggle with here this season is condensed offenses. So when teams are in very narrow splits, when their wide receivers are close to the offensive line, close to the backfield, the Chiefs are the 5th worst defense in football by EPA per play. And the Texans, they're not always that kind of offense. Like I think the Lions are the most condensed offense in football, but the Texans are 8th. So they are open to being a condensed offense when they need to be. And I think that's what you have to do here is just, set up Nico Collins in bunches, set him up in stacks, do everything you can to get him a free release against Trent McDuffie, to create some confusion on defense to who's covering him. We saw with the Curtis Samuel touchdown last week against the Broncos. Like Pat Surtain ended up giving a touchdown, quote unquote. It wasn't really Pat Surtain's guy. It was just the bunch created some confusion, and Surtain ended up being on that guy after they banjoed those routes. So that, I think, to me, is the way you do it. I don't think it can just be a one-on-one, our guy is going to win, but can you be creative enough to get him opportunities where he has positive leverage, where he has, matchups against somebody else? Because if you can do that, I think that's how you get Nico Collins going.
It's a good point. And I think, looking back at some of the games this year after Nico Collins came back where he wasn't as impactful, it was a little bit frustrating not watching Slowick be a little bit more creative in terms of finding ways to get him targets.
Yes. That is the story of the 2024 season. Bobby Slowick, could you do a little more for us, please, this time around?
Well, okay, so I have another question for you that I've been kind of wrestling with. So we talked about how I think the Chiefs are going to use 12 personnel, 13 personnel, which is something you do. Would you do it if you were the Texans? Now, that's obviously something that has gone up a great deal as they have lost their wide receivers, first Diggs and then Tank Dell. Some of it's kind of just like they just literally are running out of dudes. Some of it also is to get some help in pass protection. But here's why I'm a little conflicted. one, their tight ends just are not like Schultz has not had a
Yeah.
good year. And two, while the Chiefs are vulnerable to tight ends, you have seen that over the course of the season. They typically combat that with base, and their base
that's what I was gonna
defense
say.
is awesome. In fact, against the pass, their base defense has been much better this year than when they lean into their sub packages. So for me, like, I guess I'm mixed because on one hand, like if I'm looking at the Chiefs, I would spread them out and play 11 and try to attack downfield. But I'm just not sure the Texans can do that right now, Bill.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's the way to go. You know, you're sort of asking CJ Stroud to do a lot when he's not throwing to Nico Collins. I think you're not having that guy who's going to win one-on-one. Everything that happens outside of Nico Collins has to be a structural win. It has to be a schematic win. And CJ Stroud can do that. He can throw people open. But to me, when you add that extra linebacker onto the field for the Chiefs, that is a plus for the Chiefs. To me, that is not a weakness. The Chiefs' weakness is dudes in the secondary. They've had some injuries there. They have not been the same since losing L'Jarius Sneed last offseason, who was phenomenal for them. So good last year.
And then losing Jalen Watson this year.
Jalen Watson to an injury, yeah. So it's a lot of Joshua Williams, Najee Johnson. Like it's dudes where if you're not a dedicated listener to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny podcast, you've never heard of some of these players. And that is a bad sign for the Chiefs. That is a big problem for me. You seem to have something important.
Jalen Watson practiced. Holy crap. I thought he was... Sorry. When I said his name, I was like, let me check on that. Because I remember thinking he might be out for the season. Oh, boy. That's huge...
That would help. But it's not like Jalen Watson is L'Jarius Sneed, though, either.
Yeah,
like,
but you know who he's
good.
not? Najee Johnson. I'm sorry, my guy. But
that's fair.
Buddy. Okay, well, that's maybe not a game changer in this round, but that could certainly be something.
It helps.
Big deal down the road. The Chiefs' base defense is fantastic. We know Houston can't run the ball. You mentioned to me that Mixon is a little banged up. Well, that's something to keep an eye on.
Yes. Also,
couldn't even run the ball with Joe Mixon, so
that's true. Also, the Texans are one of the heaviest zone and especially outside zone teams in football, and the Chiefs are the second best run defense in football by EPA per play against zone runs. So even the type of runs the Texans want to do does not play well against the Chiefs.
So the path to a Texans upset here feels like it starts with that 4-man rush.
Yeah, Hunter and Anderson.
The world in which they take over, or they win this game, those two guys have to... by the way, you know, if Tooney's on the inside, then your interior is bolstered up. But if he's outside, Nico Autry was a beast last round, and I like him against... I always think of... He's Frank Caliendo.
Mike Caliendo. It's totally unfair. I do the same thing.
So, I mean, look, Texans fans, coming off of one of the best defensive performances, not just of the year, but of the postseason ever from your defense. So this is not an impossibility. The defense is healthy, which obviously they're missing their safeties, but the corners are unreal. It just feels like, Bill, the offense, while CJ Stroud did have some vintage drives he's a second-year player, he looked more like himself last week. It feels like an upset here has to start with that defense.
It's impossible to imagine them not winning without a big game from those edge rushers, right? Like, it would take something absolutely insane. It would take, 4 Patrick Mahomes interceptions, which, hey, we just saw that happen last week. It can happen. I don't think that's likely with Patrick Mahomes, but the other thing is, I just felt like in that game last week, Greg Roman did not really have answers as the game wore along. It felt like he was kind of just beating his head against the wall and doing the same thing over and over again. They couldn't run the ball effectively last week, and that set them up in a lot of third and longs, which of course the Texans are very familiar with on their own side. And then Herbert was getting killed in the third and longs. I feel like the Chiefs are not as likely to be in those third and longs. I think they're going to be smart about how they handle the pass rushers, how they chip them, how they stay out of really obvious pass rushing situations. If it is a third down, which the Chiefs are going to see a lot of, it's going to be, like you said, a 3rd and 4, a 3rd and 5. Very manageable third down situation for the Chiefs, and they're still going to get the ball out quickly in those situations. It's going to be tough. Not saying it's impossible. Stranger things have happened, but I will say it's impossible to imagine it happening without something very special from their 2 stars on the edge.
Who are unbelievable. Sounds like we're both picking the Chiefs, though.
Yes. Unfortunately for the Texans, we are picking the Chiefs.
So the next game is Commanders-Lions.
Yes.
So I want to start here. The Chiefs are looking at ESPN's odds. The Chiefs are favored by now 8.5. Mm-hmm. The Lions are favored by 9.5. I disagree with that discrepancy. I think before we even get into this game, I after I did my matchups, particularly the Commanders offense against, I was like, I'm not saying the Commanders are going to win. We listened to that, but that to me is they should not be favored by less than the Houston Texans against Kansas City Chiefs. Do you agree?
I agree, and I think so much of this is the broadcast of the Lions-Vikings game, which spent 3 hours telling us what geniuses the Lions were for their game plan against Sam Darnold. And I'm not saying that they did not have a good game plan, not saying they didn't do a great job, but Mina, I know you watched that game. Sam Darnold left 4 touchdown passes on the field in that game. He left probably 150 passing yards in that game. I know this is a dark time for you. I don't want to make you dwell on the end of the Sam Darnold era. But, I mean, I don't think the Lions defense was great in that game. I think the Vikings offense was horrific in that game. And some of that was the Lions defense making them speed up, but not all of it was.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think also the Vikings' inability to run the ball, which persisted into the next round, made it a lot easier for the Lions. And I think they're going to be more challenged against Washington, given that they do have more balance. They also there's a lot of areas where I think they match up pretty damn well with this Lions team. Something we talked about in the last round that's certainly pertinent here because the Lions are the blitz happiest team in football right now. Jayden Daniels has been excellent against the blitz. He was second in QBR, 5th in EPA per dropback. He's been solid against man coverage, 11th there, same against man or zone. But there's a couple things that the Commanders do that would make me nervous. One is no huddle. So
okay.
Yeah, so the Commanders love no huddle, right? They do what I probably
they have 677 snaps no huddle this year. Mina, that's 400 more than anybody else in football. Not only do they love the no huddle, they do it probably at a historically high rate.
Yeah. So the Lions, against no huddle, 30th in both success rate and yards per play.
Yes.
So that's a little bit concerning. Another area where they struggle, quarterback runs, 31st in success rate and yards per play against quarterback runs. One other thing I wanted to look up was pony. So the Commanders put 2 backs on the field a lot. Again, the Lions 29th in EPA per play and 31st in success rate. So there's just there's a lot of areas that I think Washington can exploit by simply leaning into their identity on offense.
Yeah, no question. And the no huddle thing is such a fascinating question to me if you're Cliff Kingsbury, and especially if you're Dan Quinn, because it's not just about what's best for us on offense, right? It's what's best for us in the context of the entire game. And if you go no huddle against the Lions, I think that is good for the offense. You're also setting up a shootout against one of the scariest offenses in football. And I'm not saying that's you can avoid that necessarily, but it's a scary proposition for this Lions defense, or for the Commanders defense. And I think the Lions defense, it makes total sense to lean into that. Not just because the Commanders are use it frequently and are good at it, but the Lions are out of players. I mean, they're down, even though they're getting some guys maybe back for this week, there are so many players on that team who are out, who are injured, who have been playing too much because the other guys around them are injured, who are going to play too much in this game because the guys around them are injured. I think it makes total sense to try and gas those guys out, keep them on the field for as much as possible, keep Aaron Glenn from dialing up exotics against Jayden Daniels, like play no huddle to force him to stay in some base packages, to keep their blitzes pretty readable. I think all of that plays into the strengths of this Washington team. So if anything, I think they should do no huddle more than they have during the regular season.
How many punts are we going to actually see in this game? You talked about, the risk of a shootout. I mean, because okay, so this was from NGS. I talked about in the last round how impressed I was with Dan Quinn, who's been going for it on a very aggressive rate this year, going for it against the Bucs, even when it failed, but sticking with it, with correctly self-scouting that his offense was his best chance of winning this thing. let me tell you, if you thought your offense had your best chance of winning this team last time, we haven't even gotten to the Lions offense against the Commanders defense. He definitely knows it this time. According to NGS, the Lions and the next gen stats, the Lions and the Commanders were the only two teams in the NFL to gain a full game's worth of win probability added from going for it on fourth down this year. We know Dan Campbell is very aware of the matchup as well. Like both offenses' ability and willingness to use all four downs in this one could lead to a who has the ball last type of situation, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of like being a little kid, or being a little kid, but being like, a teenager, and like having someone I liked who I wanted to impress, who cursed a lot, and going around them and be like, I'm just going to curse a ton, even though it's not anything like me, just because I want to impress them and feel like I fit in with them. Dan Quinn, seeing Dan Campbell across the field, know he's going for it every fourth down, I feel like it's just going to only make him more likely to be aggressive on fourth down in this situation. Like, yes, for Dan Quinn, it is we're underdogs, we have to do it. For Dan Campbell, he doesn't care. There's not like any rhyme or reason. He's just going to go for it because he wants to. It's not about. But
he has the same though. But he also knows his defense is worse than
that's true.
Defense, I think. By the way, when I was talking about Dan Campbell or I posted something about Dan Campbell and Dan Quinn, and I tried to find two wrestlers staring at each other. You know how like The Rock and like Stone Cold, which has the added advantage of both of those coaches looking probably the most like pro wrestlers in the entire NFL. Fair. I just love that these like, big former player coaches are so aggressive about
the analytics nerds. It's incredible. It's so good. As someone who was like writing about this 15 years ago and just thinking about like, we have to get someone who looks like Howie Roseman to be an NFL coach to get analytics going forward. Really incredible to me.
I found out after I praised Dan Quinn on NFL Live. He is the game management person. He used to work for the Chargers on his staff, which I did not know, during the Brandon Staley era. So that I thought was like, oh, okay, well, there you go. Before we flip to the other side of the ball, like, so, is there, if you're the Lions defense and you're Aaron Glenn, do you mix it up at all, knowing that this is a quarterback who's been so unbelievably poised against the blitz? Are you still sending that degree of pressure? Because the other thing about Jayden Daniels is if you sit back and play zone and you're passive, he'll just pick you apart. I mean, he's so willing. This has been like, there's a lot of things that obviously blow me away about him, but his willingness to consistently just make the right read or check it down is one thing that's like really, really unusual for a rookie.
Yeah, I was talking about this with our friend Robert Mays on my podcast, and just his decisiveness, his ability to diagnose what's out there, diagnose what's out to him, and then make an accurate throw. Like, even if it's just, a 5-yard speed out on 3rd and 3, like, there are quarterbacks who will hesitate to make that throw, and by the time they go to make it, it's too late, or they'll throw it late and throw a pick six. You don't see that from young quarterbacks, and I think that's a credit to Cliff Kingsbury's ability to give him answers for everything, and then Jayden Daniels' ability to diagnose and pick the right decision, and then make a good throw out of that. You asked about Aaron Glenn changing things up, though. That to me is the maybe the weakness of this Lions team at this point is from Aaron Glenn's perspective, you can't really change it up.
I know.
There's not really, you're not going to get pressure with your front four. Like, you just don't have that level of talent. No disrespect to Zadarius Smith, who's a good player, but he's not the guy from 3 or 4 years ago. And so you have this situation where there's really not any alternative. And you saw in that Vikings game, wasn't the way they changed it up was just to lean more into what they were doing, to blitz more, to play more man coverage. I don't know that they have really an alternative if it doesn't work. I think it just has to succeed that way, and it's a credit to Aaron Glenn that they've managed to pull this off and succeed this way for so many games this year. But I mean, the last 5 weeks, their defense has given up 31 to the Packers, 48 to the Bills, 17 to the Bears, who are the Bears, let's be honest, 34 to the Niners, and then like we said, that Vikings game, they only got down 9 points, but there were so many plays to be made in that game. So I think this defense is significantly worse than what the numbers say it is because of how many injuries they've had on defense over the last few weeks.
I think it's absolutely true. I also think that this Commanders team won't force the run if it's not there as well, which is, I think the defense is still actually pretty decent against the run. Their backers are much better versus the run than the pass, to be honest. So I just don't think, I think that they're willing to, I don't know.
Like, and having Anzalone back helps as well.
Yeah, having Anzalone back helps a great deal.
Although the commentary portraying Alex Anzalone as like peak Bobby Wagner when we saw him last game was very impressive to me.
The next day when we were talking about the defense, I started the show by saying, "Is the real MVP Alex Anzalone? Have we all been purely?"
Don't let Tony Dungy know. Don't say it around Tony Dungy.
People took it dead seriously. Yeah, I mean, like, so a lot of the blitzes too have involved Brian Branch in particular, but Aaron Glenn has been sending DBs. You know who's first in EPA per play against DB blitzes this year?
Who?
It's Jaden Daniels tied with Patrick Mahomes.
Ooh, not ideal.
So, yeah, I do worry. But I have good news, Lions fans. The other side of the ball is really nice for you. Also, more are you more willing to talk about who's going to win this? But oh man, I mean, just so many of the things that the Lions do and do well match up well with the Commanders. I guess do you like? Is there anything that really jumped out to you? There's a lot of things, honestly, that I think Detroit can do, similar to Washington, leaning into their identity.
Yeah, I would say this. The Lions, to me, they can play whatever personnel they want. They have the personnel to play pretty much any grouping. It's the opposite of the defense. And I would wonder if they lean into their larger personnel packages in this game, if they play more 12 personnel, even some 13 personnel, because the Commanders play base defense against those groupings at the second lowest rate of anybody in football. Yeah. And that's with Bobby Wagner, who, as we record this, is questionable to play in this game, who missed practice on Wednesday. And so I would be very concerned about the Lions responding to the Commanders playing a ton of no huddle by saying, okay, we're going to run it down your throat and let our defense rest while we're averaging 6.5 yards a carry. I think if the Commanders cannot stop the run, that alone sets this game up as a mess for their defense.
So you said 6.5 yards. I looked this up. When Detroit's in 12 and they go up against teams in nickel, because we have the same brain, how much do they average? It's actually 6.8, Bill.
Oh,
it's first in the NFL.
My apologies to the Lions fans.
Your point is very correct. It is a huge matchup advantage for them to get big and run the football. And by the way, if they pass it, the Commanders really struggle to defend tight ends, 26 in DVOA. Yes. And Laporta, who had kind of a slower start, I mean, he has really come on over the last few weeks. I would not be surprised if he becomes a big part of the Lions game plan in this one.
Yeah, and even if we move on to the wide receivers, like the cornerback situation for the Commanders is not great. And Marshawn Lattimore did come back last week, but he allowed 5 catches on 6 targets for 73 yards and a touchdown, plus an 11-yard PI, most of which was against Mike Evans. And I don't know if I don't know if Marshawn Lattimore is still 100%. It feels like he's playing more out of desperation than him being his usual self. You have Benjamin St-Juste, who is benched basically for Lattimore. You have Mike Sanders still, who I think has been pretty good this year, playing on the outside instead of playing in the slot where people expected. Noah Igbenogany has been the slot corner. I don't love Noah Igbenogany versus Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, Mina. I don't think that's a great matchup for the Commanders.
This is actually, I found to be an interesting split because I thought it would be more even. The Commanders are 30th in EPA per play and 29th in success rate versus slot targets. They're actually 14th and 6th versus receivers split out wide, which kind of surprised me. I mean, Sanders still's been I think their best corner, right? So
I agree.
I bring that up because Amon-Ra has played both inside outside this year. I would put him in the slot in this one. I just feel like, again, similar to the tight ends, working the middle of the field, getting those tight ends on the field, putting Amon-Ra in the slot. There's just so many matchup advantages to be had for Detroit. I think from the Commanders' perspective, so you got to figure out, one, when they come out heavy, are you actually going to play that much nickel and just be willing to cede that much on the ground? Because that feels like a very obvious way, not only to lose, Bill, but to keep your offense off the field, which you don't want to do. I also think, like, man, are you going to play as much man coverage as usual? So the Commanders have played a ton of man coverage this year. Goff has been good against both, but he's been the best quarterback in the NFL against man coverage this year. In fact, actually twice as much EPA per dropback, 0.4, which is insane, by the way, than versus zone. Yeah, 40.
Oh,
Crazy.
God.
0.4. So I feel like if you're Dan Quinn, like you might have to actually change up some of your tendencies on defense, because that feels like a death knell to me.
I can't imagine they would hold up against man coverage for very long in this game. I don't think you can do that and survive. And I mean, maybe you get lucky. Maybe you force an interception here or there. Maybe you do it. But to me, I think their only chance of holding up is up front. And it's kind of rough when you're hoping to beat the Lions offensive line. And that's kind of the core of what you do. But here is the Commanders fans have been listening to us trash the defense for like 5 minutes now. The only hope they have in this game on defense is this, Mina. They are the 4th best team in football at getting pressure without blitzing. And the Lions offense, everyone's bad when they allow pressure without a blitz, and you could drop 7 in the coverage. The Lions are 25th in the NFL in QBR when the opposing team gets pressure without blitzing. The book on Jared Goff for years has been, you can get pressure on this guy. He is worse than everyone else when you get pressure on him. And he's been better at times this year. The Vikings game was a good example. I think when teams blitz him and they get pressure, he's better at it. But I think getting pressure with 4, the classic Tom Brady defense. Just get pressure with 4 on Tom Brady and you stop him. Easy. It's fine. Jared Goff is more susceptible to that. And I think the Commanders, with Dante Fowler having a good year, a deeper than I think people expect or know about defensive line, that's the only really hope they have to stop him, no matter what they're playing behind in coverage to me.
So ultimately, although I do think both offenses have an advantage over both defenses, and I do think the fact that both coaches, Dan Quinn is going to coach this like an underdog, helps a lot. I really, it matters, right?
It of course does.
I'm going with Detroit here because I think they just have too many answers on offense. Mm-hmm. Whereas last week you saw Diami Brown was excellent as a second option when the Bucs defense was focused on Terry McLaurin. But the idea of like, do I really believe they're going to have like a second like crazy Diami Brown breakout game? I'm just a little bit skeptical of that. So I do think that offense is going to have success. Like I said, I think this game is going to be closer than the line, but I'm going to pick the Lions here. How about you?
Can I be honest? I'm a coward and I want to pick the Commanders, but really? I'm afraid I do. I just feel like so much of the stuff we talked about.
Take the cover.
No, that's I would do that on a television program, but you know better than that. You know that would be copping out by saying, "Oh, they're going to cover, but they're not going to win." That's why I'm being honest here. I will say Lions 34, Commanders 31. I think it is a shootout. I think it is a fun game, but I do think the Lions just have too much on offense to win this game.
All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and get to some closer games according to Vegas. All right, so the line is shrinking to 6. The Eagles are favored by 6 against the Rams. The red-hot Rams. I said this last week, Bill, or earlier this week. I absolutely freaking hate picking Rams games because every 3 games, Matthew Stafford turns into the best quarterback on earth, but you never know when that's going to happen. So it makes it freaking impossible to pick games because for 3 weeks, Matthew Stafford was like, not really doing much. And then all of a sudden he's like, no, actually, I'm a golden god.
For a half, at least. He was really good the first half. They didn't really need him in the second half against the Vikings. But I guess let's start there. Like, in terms of what you're asking Matthew Stafford to do in that game versus this game is very different to me. Because in that Vikings game, totally different defense. They're going to play they play a ton of man, but they play enough man that it's either man or it's usually cover 2, a lot of blitzes, a lot of exotics, and you're trying to hit chunk plays. Like, that is a defense where if you throw very safe, screens and stuff, they're generally going to blow that stuff up. The Rams are such a good screen team that they got a couple of them out, but that is you want to take advantage of finding the holes in their blitzes and hitting chunks against them. The Eagles are the exact opposite. Yeah. Like, they want you to hit stuff underneath. They want you to work the ball down the field slowly. They're going to rush with 4. They're not going to blitz a ton at all. And that's not my favorite thing Matthew Stafford does. Like, yes, can he do that for drives? Yes, but like, he doesn't want to do that. Sean McVay doesn't want to do that. Like, that's just not what the Rams are built to do stylistically. And so that makes this a tough matchup for me before we get to anything else about this team.
Yeah, I mean, the Brian Flores blitzed him on it felt like, honestly, 10 straight plays, but it was something like 6 or 7, and Stafford just diced it up, and that's not at all what the Eagles can do. It's not what they did the last time these teams played. This is another rematch, right? They played, what was it, week 12, I believe?
Yeah, Saquon ran for about 800
yeah.
yards in the game.
We'll get to that side of the ball. This was an interesting one, Bill, because I don't think Stafford was bad. When I went back and watched, the Rams actually did move the ball decently on them, actually better than a lot of teams, quite frankly, given how good the Eagles' offense is. But the Eagles did get a fair amount of pressure. The Rams were really doubling Jalen Carter in this one, and so everybody else around him was getting pressure. I think Milton Williams had 2 sacks, who's quietly been awesome for them. Sweat, Nakobe Dean, and a sack, is not playing.
Yeah,
but we'll talk about that in a second. But they were still able to get the ball to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. One of the things that stuck out to me was the Eagles, who have been very good against teams that use motion this year, did struggle a little bit against some of the bigger plays, particularly to Puka Nacua. They were able to get him leverage using motion. He had a big crosser where he did a little cheat motion against Isaiah Rodgers, and then Stafford got him. He had Cooper Kupp. This was Nacua. This was actually great. One of their play action passes. Kupp motions in like they're going to duo block. Everybody on the Eagles bites. Nakua's wide open on a slide route for another big catch and gain. So I guess I just bring this, like, the Sean McVay did find some answers against this defense. It just wasn't enough, particularly given the offensive onslaught on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the other side for sure. And I think that might disqualify anything else related to the Rams when it comes to this side of the game. But I do think Sean McVay thinks a lot about how to solve this Vic Fangio defense. And like, this almost goes back to, I mean, this is the guy who broke Sean McVay. Remember all those years ago, the Bears were the first team to run that 6-1 against Sean McVay and the Rams, and the Patriots copied it in the Super Bowl. And that's eventually caused Sean McVay to change his entire offense. Like that, the core of that offense is different now than it was 5 years ago because of Vic Fangio. But what I think McVay does really well from game to game and week to week is, I think, change the way the Rams use their game plans to attack some of the weaknesses in, sort of how teams are trying to cover. And for the Eagles with Vic Fangio, I think you can get them a little bit because they're such a zone-heavy defense by using condensed splits, by using I said earlier, those narrower formations to try and attack. The Eagles are number 1 in the NFL in EPA per play against normal splits or wide splits. They are 15th in the NFL in EPA per play against condensed splits. And if you're playing a ton of zone, that is one way to attack those zones. Is just, flood different zones, stretch linebackers, try to, just as Vic Fangio tries to hide what he's doing pre-snap to make it harder for you to see what he's going to do post-snap. I think having those route distributions be closer to each other, trying to mask what you're trying to do, not only pre-snap, but then in the first couple seconds post-snap, makes it harder to sort of, poach receivers from the backside to have the ability to, read those route distributions and make good decisions accordingly. And so I think McVay has to play with that in this game and try to take advantage of knowing, for better or worse, what Vic Fangio does stylistically in most places against the pass.
I love that point because it played a big role. So Puka Nacua had 117 yards in this game. I mentioned a couple of his big plays, but a lot of it was coming out of those condensed splits where he was aligned tight to the formation, and it was a way to keep him and Kupp at some of their points away from Cooper DeJean, who was excellent in this one. But McVay came up with ways to get those guys on other DBs in this, and also, like I said earlier, to get them leverage. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. I am interested in seeing how the absence of Nakobe Dean affects the Eagles' run defense, because it wasn't an issue last week, really, but that game kind of got out of hand. He has been a really big part of their ability to play with those light boxes. He just has been firing downhill against the run. And also with him there, Zach Bond is this chess piece in the defense. I suspect Oren Burks is going to be filling in for him this week. Does that concern you? Do you think it's something that Sean McVay tries to take advantage of?
I mean, hey, the Chiefs, what was it? I forgot the numbers specifically for Oren Burks in the Super Bowl, but he came in for the injured Dre Greenlaw. And if I remember correctly, the Chiefs were like 10 for 10 throwing at Oren Burks in that game. Like, that literally might have decided the Super Bowl. It was that big of a downgrade from Dre Greenlaw. And Oren Burks is not a bad football player, but that's a player you can stretch and leverage, or stretch and coverage. It's a player you can fool with some play action. And I wonder how the Rams try to attack this game, because something they did last week and something they've done very selectively this year is leaning to 12 personnel. Sean McVay's always been an 11 personnel guy. And I think when everyone's healthy, he probably wants to be an 11 personnel guy. But even after Tyler Higbee went down early in that game last week, they used 12 personnel 51% of the time. Yeah. And they used it 41% of the time earlier in the year against the Vikings, which tells me it's probably we see something in the Vikings where we want them to be out of their 5-6 defensive back sets. They used it 2% of the time against the Eagles the first time these two teams played. But I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're getting Tyler Higbee back from his chest injury for this game. And now you have no Nakobe Dean. So I wonder if that's one of the ways they get out of this, is just not only to attack Oren Burks, but to get more linebackers on the field, is just try to get bigger, try to run the ball more, try to force the Eagles to play their base defense, because they're now very thin at linebacker after losing one of their two starters.
Is it crazy that we're at a point where, not like earlier, I was like, they just had to figure out a way to get guys away from Cooper DeJean, and they're like 12 personnel. Keep Cooper DeJean off the field. Like, did you ever think Cooper DeJean would become? I mean, I thought he was good, but like, oh my God, I think he's unbelievable, and
he's unbelievable. And he's not even like the biggest surprise on the Eagles defense, because Zach Bond turning into the Terminator after being an edge rusher for the Saints was not on my list of things likely to happen with the Eagles this year either.
So I was buying a little time there because I wanted to see how the Eagles match 12 personnel. This is interesting. It's about an even split-ish between nickel and base. So that would
go from number 1 in EPA per play versus 11 personnel to 8th in EPA per play against 12. So not bad necessarily, but anything you're trying to do to get them out of what they're comfortable with, I think, is a win for the Rams.
Yeah, and I'd be interested breaking those down to between like nickel and base and seeing, but also like, listen, if you don't have Nakobe Dean, it's Oren Burks. I don't care what the past numbers tell you. It's I'm sorry, but you want Oren Burks on the field as much as possible, and whatever, so yeah, that's a really great point about that defense versus that offense. Okay.
I also mentioned how the Rams changed their offense after Vic Fangio ruined Sean McVay's life with the 6-1 front. So just as a brief history of all that, Ted Wynn wrote a good article about this years ago for The Athletic. Rams are a very zone-heavy team. They used zone pretty much all the time with Todd Gurley in that era. Vic Fangio introduced the 6-1 front, a 6-person front, to try and prevent the cutback. It shut down the run. Patriots used it in the Super Bowl. Sean McVay went into darkness retreat for a year. He came back out. They wanted to be a gap-heavy team. They changed their offense, trade for Kevin Dotson. They signed Jonah Jackson and then don't use Jonah Jackson, which is weird. But Kyron Williams becomes a superstar based on the Rams being a gap-run team. Mina, do you know who is number 1 in the league in EPA per play against gap runs on defense?
I'm guessing it's these Philadelphia Eagles.
It is these Philadelphia Eagles with those big dudes up front. Oh, Sean McVay has to be so upset. He spent years preparing for this matchup. And Vic Fangio came back with these dudes up front who are going to shut down his gap runs. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, they ran the ball like, okay, last time they played, but not that great. So, yeah, I think this is going to have to be another Matthew. Well, I think there's matchups to go after, but it's definitely going to have to be another big Matthew Stafford day because on the other side of the ball. Ooh, buddy. So the Eagles, the last time these teams played, the Rams, the last time these teams played, ran into the classic math problem that is the Philadelphia Eagles, which is you want to allocate extra humans towards stopping the run, but if you play single high, they will murder you in the passing attack. It feels a little bit sacrilegious not to start with the Saquon discussion, but I actually wanted to emphasize the fact that A.J. Brown, he last seen reading on the sideline, caught 6 of 7 targets for 109 yards. All 7 targets were against single high coverage in this game. So if the Rams focus on stopping Saquon, well, then the Eagles have had a lot of success throwing to A.J. Brown.
Yeah, and he didn't have big numbers last week. Maybe that led him to read on the sidelines. I know he said he's read every game, by the way. Find it extremely unlikely that he would have made it this far into his career without the cameras picking up on him reading a book on the sideline.
Kindle,
but
maybe?
Perhaps it's fair.
People thought it was Microsoft Surface.
On the Surface. That's the one app. Roger Goodell, listen, you can either have game film on here or you can have a very basic Kindle library and nothing else. I would say the question is, it's pick your poison, right? Like you can play too high and Saquon Barkley can carve you up and the offensive line can carve you up, or play single high and sort of dare Jalen Hurts to miss. And I think that's probably the path I would go at this point, just given how consistently good Saquon has been this year. And I think given the Rams personnel up front, I think I'd rather trust their secondary than trust their front seven in some ways against the run. They're good rushing the passer, but that's a different conversation. But again, it feels so different to me on the matchup we saw last week. I picked the Packers to beat the Eagles, which looks stupid now, but I swear I had my reasons. One of which was the Packers are really good at taking away big plays. They'd allowed 140-yard gain all year. Average team had allowed like 11. Eagles 16th in success rate this year. So they were they wanted to get chunks, and they were really good at it, but the Packers did a pretty good job on keeping them from doing that for most of the game, and that slowed down the offense for them most of the game. Defense was definitely, everything else was the problem, but the defense was not the issue. And the Rams are the opposite. Like, they allow 66 gains of 20 yards or more this year, 7th most in football. A bunch of those happened in that first Rams-Eagles game. To me, I think that is a big problem. I think they just match up stylistically in terms of what they allow much worse than the Packers did a week ago.
The path for a Rams defensive upset, which with the Rams defense was excellent last one, to me just starts very clearly up front. You talked about the Packers defense having success against Jalen Hurts, and while they were, I thought, really good in coverage, kind of shockingly good in coverage, a lot of it was that interior pass rush. And this is, I mean, just we've seen this with Jalen Hurts. Like, if you can get pass rush on the inside in particular, by the way, and flush him outside the pocket, he turns into a different quarterback on the season. Inside the pocket, he is 4th in EPA per play. Outside the pocket, he is 27th. It goes from 0.21 to negative 0.2. Now, doing that is easier said than done because his pocket is usually pristine. And then last time these teams played, the Rams got a decent amount of pressure, but according to Next Gen Stats, they had an average time to pressure that was the longest of the entire season. So the Eagles' offensive line won that matchup. To me, for them to pull this off, they have to be able to get Jalen Hurts out of the pocket.
Yeah, and to me, that's a Braden Fisk game, right? Because, he has been quietly, Jared Verse has gotten a ton of attention, and deservedly so. He's an awesome football player, but Braden Fisk has not been much worse. The only problem is the interior of the Eagles' offensive line is awesome. And so that makes this a lot harder. To me, I think, whether it's we're going to run a bunch of twist game, whether it is a Braden Fisk win us some one-on-one matchups game, I think there's no way to do it without that. It's sort of like, we were talking about the Texans, right? Like, they have to have Hunter Anderson play a big game. I don't think the Rams secondary can hold up. They made some really good plays against the Vikings last week. That Akella Witherspoon tackle on that screen was incredible. But that kind of felt like a game of small miracles for me. It felt like there were some plays to be made that Sam Darnold did not make. Even though Jalen Hurts has been very inconsistent this year, it's just tougher for me to see that happening quite as often in this game.
Also, because the Vikings are not a good rushing team, they were able to play the game on their terms. And to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, the Eagles just, because the run game is so dominant, because Saquon Barkley's so amazing, because they're so good at run blocking, you have to play on their terms. I mean, you said, at the beginning, like, you probably end up just doing single high just because you'd rather, like, you live by that, the downfield accuracy rather than getting just, run on.
Gashed.
That's the Eagles dictating on offense. I would also, by the way, look at Saquon as a pass catcher in this one. The Rams defense has really struggled to defend passes to running backs, all year long. So I do think they'll play some split safety, and that's something that I would look for in those situations too.
Yeah, I also think it's how you play split safety, right? Like, I think if you can muddle the picture for Jalen Hurts post-snap and try to slow him down and then use that extra time to try and get after the quarterback and hope you do get, an extra half second to work with, that helps. Like, Jalen Hurts is a very smart processor. But for any quarterback, I think if you muddle the picture for them, it's going to help. Vic Fangio, his entire defense is predicated on that notion. The one problem is if you go back last year, I would be sitting here saying, okay, well, one of the ways to attack Jalen Hurts is to blitz him because the Eagles not have good answers against the blitz. That has changed. Jalen Hurts is number one in QBR against the blitz this year. To his credit, to Kellen Moore's credit, that is entirely flipped this year. So the blitz to me is off the table for the Rams. And then, okay, well, maybe if the Eagles slow the game down with play action, maybe that's the way the Rams can get pressure. Well, the Rams are 30th in QBR allowed against play action this season, so that is not a way for them to get going. For the Texans, I can at least sit here and say, okay, I can see a game where Hunter and Anderson take over. It is so much harder for me to see a game where the Rams defense can take over and win this game.
Yeah, the play action thing note is interesting because I was like, oh, well, to my eye, the Rams defense really has played better as the year goes on, but I cut it in half and they were 26 since week 10. So it's not like something that they've dramatically improved at. It is something that the Eagles have been doing. That under center play action has been really good this year.
And we got to our friend Nate Tice, the first under center non-play action pass of Jalen Hurts' career.
I think he plays well in this one. I think he bounces back, and I think the Eagles win just because that offense is so overwhelming.
Can I throw a theory out there that I'm going to regret?
Oh, God.
I think the Rams defense is actually bad. Like, I don't think it's even good. They're 30th in EPA per play outside the red zone. They are 4th inside the red zone. And Mina, I know you know this, but maybe some of your listeners don't know this. You have to be good outside the red zone if you want to consistently be good inside the red zone. It is not sustainable to be good just inside the red zone. I don't think they can hold the Eagles in the red zone in this game. And I think that leads to a rout for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Ooh, a rout.
I'm going to say 31-13.
Woo!
I will say comfortably cover.
All right. Well, there you go. Bold Barnwell. I do think they'll win. I feel like there's just like a lot of heat around the Rams right now, which is why that line was so much smaller. But the Commanders-Lions game. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the Lions actually obliterate them, but I think that one is off relative to the others. So, all right. You know what's not a big line? The main event. We have reached, what do they call it? The top card, the headliner. What is it called in boxing? The main event. The entree of this 4-course meal, even though dessert is last. There's no dessert on my menu.
Really working on this metaphor. Really.
Texans Chiefs is the amuse-bouche. I hope I said that right. Commanders Lions is the salad course. Rams Eagles is the soup, and Ravens Bills is the steak.
Okay.
I don't know why you would have soup after salad, but it's
and then we're going to watch college football national championship for dessert, maybe?
There you go. So I want to start by talking about what happened in the last game because that's a lot. I just watched it. Before it got out of hand, really, the first few drives, because the Ravens get up to 21-3. So the Ravens offense in this one, first, Derrick Henry comes out and has an 87-yard touchdown. I skip over. There's a Bills drive where they actually have a decent job running the football. But Travis Jones is a TFL, misses Dalton Kincaid. They end up punting. Okay, nothing's really. They're kind of dinking and dunking a little bit, which was kind of a trend. Then the Ravens come out during the pistol. Derrick Henry. It's a crunch rep.
I was going to say, wasn't it crunch? Yeah, I was so excited.
Yeah, I know. I was like, because I've tried to get better at identifying runs right in real time as they happen. 87 yards. It's like, oh my God. Okay, Bills are back. Josh Allen's well protected. He's checking it down, gets Kincaid man coverage, but there's a holding call from Spencer Brown that sets them back. He's incomplete, throwing deep. Get back to that to Keon Coleman. It's another holding call. It's over. So the holding calls really hurt them. Ravens come back out. Okay, so 21 personnel, 22 personnel, 12 personnel, 22 personnel. I'm going to return to this as a theme. It's screens, boots, play action, pass to Henry out of the backfield. So now they're up 14-3. Next Bills drive, David Ojabo blows up a screen, ends that one before it starts. Ravens are at 14-3, and this is the last drive I'll recap, I promise, because I know this is boring. But
I was gonna say this is like the Mina Kimes version of the John Gruden reading box scores and just being excited about it.
Okay, I you know what? I won't even get into it all, but suffice to say, again, it's a very strong emphasis on heavy personnel, play action. Lamar is very well protected. They are attacking the Bills' backup linebackers, culminating in a touchdown where he hits Justice Hill on the wheel route versus, I think it was Baylon Spector in that one, right? Or it could have been Dorian Williams. I don't know. But it was Baylon Spector and Dorian Williams were in that game. And then the game's basically over. Then he's dropped 21-3. So there's two sides of this: the Bills' offense and the Ravens' defense. We should probably start with the Bills' offense, the Bills' defense. We should probably start with the Ravens' offense against the Bills and how they approached it, and whether or not they can replicate that in this game. I guess if you weren't completely bored to tears by my play-by-play description there, the Ravens had a pretty obvious game plan, Bill, aside from, just Derrick. I don't think they anticipated Derrick Henry breaking off 87 yards in the first play. They wanted to put large humans on the field. Yeah. Backs, tight ends, a lot of 21 and 22 personnel. And then they wanted to either run out of that or play action off of it. Now, they did that in large part because the Bills were playing their backup linebackers and Taron Johnson wasn't in the game. Mm-hmm. The Bills ended up, I promise I'll end this monologue soon. The Bills ended up playing a lot of base defense in this one to try to stop the bleeding. It did not go very well for them. Mm-hmm. So I think my question for you is, with the Bills now having Johnson back as well as their starting linebackers, who are Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, who are much better in both the run and coverage, do you think the Ravens take a similar approach of just getting heavy? And it wasn't, I don't know why, Bill, but I guess because of that Derrick Henry, I remembered the game as the Ravens just pounding them into submission. And I think that's because in the second half, once they were up, they were still able to do that. But I wanted to recap those first three drives because upon rewatching it, it was a pretty even run pass split for Baltimore. Yeah. They were just big doing it.
Yeah. And I think that's going to continue from Baltimore's side. For beyond the fact that they're good at that, we don't know as we record this if, say, Flowers is going to play. He did not practice today, Wednesday as we record this, so it seems even more likely that they will probably, lean into more 2-3 tight end sets without him on the fold. But also, the Bills defense, you said they played base a bunch against the Ravens. That is an exception to the rule. They are an extremely light box defense against 2 or 3 tight end sets. When you take away the red zone snaps, the Bills played their base defense just 13% of the time. That is the lowest rate for any team in the National Football League. And when you have Matt Milano, when you have Terrell Bernard, maybe you can get away with that. Maybe you're better at doing that against most teams, but that just seems like a recipe
for disaster. Can you do that against the Baltimore Ravens?
That just feels so different to me. And that's where it starts for me. That's where this all starts for me in this game, is just, can the Bills play light boxes against the Ravens and survive? And I could see a case for it because, Lamar is very fast and he's not a big person, but they played light boxes last week against Bo Nix and the Broncos 90% of the time. That shows you how little they respected the run of the Broncos in that game. They're not going to be that extreme in this game, but I think that's probably where you start looking at things.
I just can't get over them playing so much base down to linebackers because
I think they had no choice.
They had no, they were just getting bodied. And I think that's what I worry about here for Buffalo is like, Taron Johnson is one of my favorite slots corners in the entire NFL. He is an absolute demon against the run. The Ravens will body him if they come out and play nickel. And it doesn't have to be, it's a size thing. Yeah. If they come out, and this is why this is going to be fascinating from like a chess match perspective, because I do think there's a little bit of feeling out going out. If they come out and play nickel and you're Baltimore and you've got Patrick Ricard, or the Ravens played with a ton of 6 offensive linemen last week, which was, they rarely do, like Buffalo, Josh Jones. If the Ravens come out with either jumbo or more likely 21 or 22 personnel on that first drive, and they see Taron Johnson on the field, I'm running the damn ball.
You should.
And then if the Bills say, oh my God, they're just running on us, we have to put a linebacker on the field. Well, I go back to this game script last time. So in the first half, before things got out of hand, they actually, out of when they had Ricard and 21 or 22 personnel, they actually passed 53% of the time because the Bills were obviously selling out against the run, and they averaged 12 yards a play.
Yeah, I mean, they were number one in the NFL in QBR targeting tight ends this year. I know it wasn't like a monstrous season for Mark Andrews until the end of the year. I know it wasn't, outside of week one, a crazy season for Isaiah Likely, but they were super efficient. Lamar was throwing the football to those tight ends. And again, like, Matt Milano is going to help. That is going to be a major difference in this game. Terrell Bernard, also a super underrated player. So these are two really good linebackers, but Milano's played 3-4 games this year. And he wasn't 100% in those games. I thought it was really promising, if you're a Bills fan, that early in the game against the Broncos, they had him spying Bo Nix on a third down, and they made a tackle on Bo Nix scrambling to the sideline on a third down. I don't think they would be comfortable doing that if they did not think that Matt Milano's groin was close to 100%, or his body was close to 100%. I'm not saying he's going to tackle Lamar as a spy. That's not going to happen. But I do think just him having the range to tackle Bo Nix sideline to sideline is a major step in the right direction and a promising thing. But I mean, that is it's not that it's a weakness for the Bills necessarily at linebacker. It's just such an obvious strength for the Ravens, and it puts linebackers in such a bind, and it puts the slot corner in such a bind. It puts the safeties in such a bind in terms of how they are coming up to fill run gaps. I think that's where this all starts for me. And I think if the Ravens can control that, it's really hard to the Bills overcoming it otherwise.
The Bills, speaking of personnel matchup, because it sounds like we both were looking at these. The Bills have faced 6 offensive linemen 34 times. The majority of that they've matched with nickel, which is hilarious because I guarantee you, if they do that against Baltimore, man, let me make a prediction here. At some point in this game, the Ravens are going to come out with 6 offensive linemen, and Lamar Jackson's going to throw the ball. I'm just telling you right now.
Of course he will. They should.
I do want to go back to Zay Flowers really quickly. So Zay Flowers was not a big factor in this first game. Some of it is because, again, it got out of hand and they just started running the football with the lead. But even in the first half, he was not a big he only got 2 targets total. So the Bills, I know I just Bills defense, I don't want to sound like we're only negative about it. They're very, very good outside the numbers. Christian Benford is a fantastic outside cornerback. So I think we saw the last time the Ravens thought, okay, cool, let's not press that matchup. So while I do think not having him hurts, especially if you want to hit like deep shot plays off of play action, if you want to target the deep middle of the field, which you saw Bo Nix do against Buffalo last week, not having him would hurt. I don't think it's like devastating in this game. Do you think that's overconfident? Just from a matchup perspective to me.
I mean, it certainly didn't hurt last week. It wasn't like we noticed Zay Flowers being gone last week. And I do think, you brought up a really good point in bringing up that Bo Nix play. I'm sure you're thinking of the long touchdown pass in the opening drive where it's play action, against a split safety look. It's a condensed split, and it's Troy Franklin's not a great NFL wide receiver, but he can run fast straight. And if you can run past Rapp, you can run past Hamlin, you can beat these Bill safeties. They are not, peak Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. That's just not what they are at this point. So I do think you can do that. And even, by the way, we talked about all this 12 personnel stuff. When the Ravens did play 11 personnel last week, only 8 snaps. The offense produced 106 yards and 2 touchdowns on those 8 snaps. That was the Bateman 15-yard touchdown catch and the Derrick Henry 44-yard touchdown in the third quarter to put the game away. So even without Zay Flowers, they were super effective in 11 personnel last week. So I think they can use that as a changeup. You'd rather have Zay Flowers in those groupings, but I think, the Ravens, number one, are capable of running 11 personnel, and I think giving teams problems that way. And then I think on top of that, they can throw the ball for play action in those situations. Yeah. I want to ask you, in terms of how the Bills approached Lamar in that game, it felt to me, and you just watched it, so I don't know what you think, it felt like the goal was really just to confine him in the pocket. He had 1 pass of his 18 pass attempts outside the pocket, only 4 passes on the run. He didn't throw a ton, only 18 attempts in the game because they were leading by so much. But I sort of wonder, do you think that's a viable strategy for the Bills this time around?
Yeah. How do I put this?
Yeah, the play I'm imagining, remember last week, the first Jalen Hurts touchdown against the Packers, where Packers really were like,
20 seconds.
yeah. we're going to stay in our run lanes. You're not getting out of the lanes, but we're not getting you. And you have all the time in the world to search through and find an open receiver.
I know.
It kind of feels like that scenario to me for the Bills.
I mean, Lamar, I wish I had there's no real good answer here, right? Because I talked about how Jalen Hurts, it's a very obvious mandate to get him outside the pocket, but he's not good at throwing the run. Lamar is good both inside and outside the pocket. So there's not really, I think, I always go back to the Steelers week 16. Was it week 16 when they beat it? No, the original week 14.
Early in the year.
It was second half season, but the game they won. I go back to their plan against Lamar where it was almost, there was definitely like a mandate to keep in the pocket, but they also had like a delayed blitz, and that kind of muddied things up for him. The problem is the Ravens in that game were keeping in guys to chip because they were so afraid of the Steelers' edges. I don't know if they're going to have that same fear of these Bills' edges.
I also picture them reading the hell out of those Bills edges in this game. Like, I just see Von Miller getting read into the sun. I don't see that being a good matchup for the Bills when he's on the field. To me, we talked about, it has to be this guy or that guy. To me, Ed Oliver feels like he looms very big in this game for the Bills. If Ed Oliver can do well against probably the guards or the weakest part of this Ravens pass protection group, maybe the right tackle as well, Rosengarten, I feel like that's a way you slow down Lamar, hopefully, so you can just get some initial interior pressure.
So good last week though against TJ Watt. Ed Oliver is a big one because there are games where you see him get TFLs. But again, this is with the Ravens because of the late handoffs and in terms of like the zone reads, it's very, an aggressive rush against the run can be a little bit weak or risky, pardon me. But I think with the Bills, it's just like you just can't get moved. Like you can't, like, I actually think if they're able to get Lamar into third and 5 or long, like they've got a good chance. I think this pass defense is quite good, especially if there's no Zay Flowers. My question is, how often are you going to get into third and long against them because of the run?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part. I guess I'd ask you, like, in terms of how the Bills can change what they do, you mentioned third down. I think that makes sense. Do you blitz a lot on third down? Because the Bills they don't blitz very often, but when they do, they're really good at it. The problem is Lamar is a freak against the blitz. Like, he's going to scramble on you, and he's going to extend plays and do the Lamar thing, and eventually someone's going to get open. So that's not what the Bills do typically. They want to rush 4. They want to drop 7 into coverage. But are you so scared of Lamar in those situations, inevitably finding someone open, that you think you have to send extra pressure and hope that it gets home?
I think there's an opportunity there to take him by surprise by inverting some of their subverting or inverting some of their tendencies in terms of when they blitz. And, as you said, they're not like a very blitz happy team. In a way, that Pittsburgh did that first time.
Yeah.
I just think generally Matt Milano has to have the game of his life. I said Patrick Queen has to have the game of his life, and he did not. So we'll see how things go with Matt Milano. But just going back and watching those first few drives, Bill, it was so obvious what their game plan was. And now you've got different players in, you've got much better players in. I think it's just going to come down to whether or not those guys can do a better job of just not getting bodied in the run game, handling the backs in coverage when you play. We'll see if they play nickel or base, but some of those like catches, throws, Justice Hill was like a big part of the passing attack last time.
And Justice Hill is really good, I think, at not only, existing in the concepts of the Ravens passing game, but also we saw a touchdown last week where he leaked out as a blocker and gave Lamar an answer on one of those plays where he was extending the play forever. They're so good at sort of like that. Not like, it's not a designed route, like leaking out, 4 seconds into a play. I don't know if that's in the playbook necessarily, but that ability of Lamar to improvise and then someone to get open as a blocker, whether it be a tight end, whether it be a running back out of the backfield on a scramble drill, that's so hard to stop. And I think that's something that does create a bunch of big plays for them.
Hill's so underrated, by the way. Like, I feel like he does have that great rapport with him in the as a pass catcher, and he's a good blocker as well. And getting him on linebackers, even if they're better linebackers, is still something I think Baltimore wants to do.
For sure.
So I guess just my feeling is the Ravens are going to do something similar as kind of a feeling out.
Yeah.
With the Bills, going back and watching, I did feel like the holding penalties really killed them on those drives. And then things just got out of hand. then this was an interesting one because, of course, then they had to Josh Allen had to just become a pure drop back passer for most of the game, and the Ravens pass rush was able to get after it because they weren't all season long. Similarly to the Ravens, a lot of similarities between these offenses. The Bills have been able to put teams in conflict because of the combination. They have this dominant run game. They play action off of it, but when they fell behind, which they have so rarely this season, they struggled a bit in the pass game, and Baltimore was kind of able to tee off. Do you think playing ball control football and, if they can avoid that sort of game script, they can continue doing what they've done all season long, which is run the ball so much and so well?
I do. And I think that's probably their best path to winning. I would say even ball control is one way to put it. I would just say maybe in my head, the way I think about it is the avoiding negative play control.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, I've talked about this a bunch. I don't think it's news to you, but just in terms of, how people perceive Josh Allen versus what Josh Allen actually does. I think when people think of Josh Allen, they think of the throwing 50 yards, falling out of bounds, play, and he does that. And I do, and he does it enough that people talk about it. But to me, what Josh Allen is now is he's a negative play avoidance machine. He never takes sacks. He completes a ton of passes. When he does get pressure, he usually can scramble for a few yards. He is so good at turning a sack into an incompletion, turning an incompletion into a 6-yard gain with his legs. And then, of course, he's good on 3rd and 4th down as a runner as well. And so that makes him so difficult to stop because it is just a constant stream of moving forward, is a constant stream of gaining yardage. And it doesn't have to be a traditional run game, although they can run the football effectively. James Cook has been awesome this year, and they can bust big plays with the run. But I think this is an offense where we know they're going to be aggressive on 4th down, which helps. We know that they're consistently good running the football with Josh Allen, with James Cook, and they're not going to take sacks. And when you have that, you can hold onto the football, you can move the ball down the field slowly, you can hit a ton of 3rd and 4th downs. That is a really good recipe for beating this Ravens team.
It is. And I guess one thing that makes me, I would say nervous, but the Ravens offense, I think, in terms of styles make fights, matches up better with the Bills defense, because the Bills defense excellent out. Their defenses are opposites of each other in some ways. Bills defense is awesome outside the numbers. If they have a weakness, it's the middle of the field. And then the fact that they play so much nickel and you can run on them, which would be awesome for the Bills offense to face. But they're facing the Ravens defense, which has been very good against the run, very good at stopping short passes, limiting yards after the catch. They're weak outside the numbers, right? And this is, even last week against the Steelers, Russell Wilson went 4 for 5 on go balls for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. This has been an issue all year long. We've seen this. It's Brandon Stevens. Let's call it what it is for the most part. But it's the Ravens corners. So I think for Buffalo, while I do think they'll be able to run the ball okay, and I think that last time just it was a combination of things getting out of hand and some bad penalties early on, whether or not they they could go toe to toe with the Ravens offense might be predicated on whether Josh Allen can hit a few of those shots outside the numbers. And I sent this to you before because I found it interesting. So by far, his target on go balls was Keon Coleman, who had 19 targets, caught 5 of them for 96 yards. So not ideal. No other Bill has more than 10. Whether or not he catches those, that could be because you like that matchup with Stevens.
Yeah.
But those are, balls like that are low percentage traditionally, and whether or not he comes down with it, I really think could be a big part of whether or not the Bills offense has the kind of success they need.
That Chiefs game came down to one deep completion to Stephon Diggs last year, and a game where Josh Allen was very good at taking what the Chiefs were giving and moving the ball slowly down the field as the game wore along over and over and over again. It's a really good point. And I would say what I find interesting about the Ravens defense is the story heading into that Steelers game was okay. Yeah, we were bad earlier in the year against deep throws, but once we moved Kyle Hamilton to free safety, we were good. We benched Marcus Williams. Problem solved. We're closed for business deep. And then the Steelers' offense was horrific in the first half of that game. But in a situation where they had to throw, where there was no choice but to hit big plays, the Steelers, who are not a great offense in any stretch of the imagination, hit some big plays. So to me, if the Steelers can do it, kind of have to feel like Josh Allen and the Bills can do it, no?
I know Josh Allen can. I guess that's why. No, I mean, my question. That's why I kept phrasing it like Keon Coleman has to catch the football because, I mean, and I like Coleman. I think he's been, he's obviously improved as the years gone along. I just bring him up because when I think about whether or not you can take advantage of the Ravens, Brandon Stevens' weakness, it just comes down to whether or not you can act on those, whether or not you got a dude who can punish him, and that could be a big factor in this because I think the Ravens' run defense has been spectacular. The Ravens have been amazing. I think the best in the NFL against quarterback runs as well.
Really?
Granted, wow. Josh Allen's a different animal in that regard, but still, their strengths do align a lot better with the Bills and what they do on offense and what's made them so hard to stop this year.
Did the Bills? Did I see correctly? The Bills signed Anthony Brown this week to simulate Lamar Jackson.
Oh snap!
Practice.
I love that.
Poor Anthony Brown has to replace Lamar Jackson in real life for the Ravens. Now he has to impersonate Lamar Jackson in practice. Just not like the most impossible person to impersonate on the planet.
When the Rams made John Wolford simulate Lamar Jackson, that has to be the funniest one of all time.
Well, I feel like I hit my Mina mentions John Wolford doing a podcast with me. Bingo. I mean, the one guy who comes up to me who never gets talked about with this Bills team is Amari Cooper. I know that, yes, when we think about hitting a big shot downfield, it can be a go route, but it can also be a back shoulder. Amari Cooper is very good at 50-50 balls. He's very good at back shoulders. And I wonder if that's a way to attack the Ravens at the sidelines. It's not just, can we throw over them, but can we throw at them and trust that our guy is going to win those 50-50 balls? I think that this could be a game for Amari Cooper to hit a couple of those.
I think if the Bills come out in 12 or 13, they play a lot of 12. You probably move Humphrey to the outside, right? You really, if you're the Ravens, Marlon Humphrey, has to stay in the field all the time. And then
but they play light boxes at the fourth lowest rate, or they play their base defense at the fourth lowest rate in the league against 12 and 13 personnel. So they're good in those situations. They're good at stopping the run with their light boxes, but I wonder if the Bills just are like, that's our way to do it. Like we have to challenge them to be, in the situation. Or maybe you want to go with more 11 personnel and you want to get Stevens on the field.
You definitely. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean.
You do.
You definitely. Do. I mean, the way you beat the Ravens is very different from the way you beat the Bills. Not to be redundant here, but again, it is explosive passes. Mm-hmm. Explosive passes outside the numbers. So I do think that's big. I think that Josh Allen will hit some of those. I think that I know I just said the Ravens amazing against scrambling quarterbacks, amazing against the run. Josh Allen and this run game are different. This is the funny thing about doing stats over the course of the season, and then you're like, well, but you have the best in front of you. And so even if you're really good against scrambling quarterbacks all year long, are you against scrambling quarterbacks who are also actual Buffaloes? Maybe not. So I think they'll have success. Though ultimately I ended up sticking with Baltimore in this one. Just because of the styles make fights aspect of it.
Yeah.
I just think the fact that the Ravens defense has been so good against the run, and I just, oh God, there's my dog saying podcast is over. If they were flipping, if the Bills got to play the Bills defense and the Ravens had to play the Ravens defense, I would probably pick Buffalo, if that makes sense. And
that makes absolutely no sense. I'm sorry. I don't know what the comparison is. What are the options for who I can pick in that universe?
It's about matchups is my point, and I just think the Ravens have a slightly better matchup on offense than the Buffalo Bills do.
I will make two predictions about this game. I predict Josh Allen will have a rushing touchdown in the first quarter, and we will hear the loudest MVP chant you have ever heard at a game before. And then I think the Ravens will pull this one out with their running game later on. I think it'll be closer than the first game, but I also lean towards the Ravens here.
Yeah, penalties will be huge. I talked about the Bills having penalties in the last game, and the last time we played, and that being such an issue. People always ask me, what does it take to slow down the Ravens this year? it takes them having offensive penalties on first down and the run coming off the table, Lamar patting the football, trying to sign some guy downfield. That's the world you want to live in, I always say. So I think for the Bills, and that would be the way another reason why this goes your way. One is the change in linebacker and having Taron Johnson, and if Matt Milano has a game of his life. The other thing that would happen is I think if the Ravens commit penalties.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
All right, that's it for this week. You guys should. I don't know if you guys can hear. Can you hear that sound, Bill? It is.
It sounds like the Jurassic Park noises when they're in the car hiding.
Nino learned how to open doors, which has been a wonderful development.
Really?
That's my baby, but fortunately, Lenny cannot. Unfortunately, it means he pounds on doors. All right, so you guys should check out Bill's preview pod yet, or you said you were on?
I have a different pod with our friend Robert Mays, not about the preview. I say my preview for this show, but we have a things we believed heading into 2024 that we no longer believe about the NFL based on what we saw. That's on the show this week.
You guys will have to check that out. That sounds good. You should check out the Bill Barnwell Show wherever you get your pods. You can follow Bill on X. Am I sorry saying X? Blue Sky. You can check out this podcast at youtube.com/@Mina Kimes. There's also I'm going to do a video there this week on which is the best coaching job, similarly to what I did last year. Otherwise, I will be back next week with Dominique to recap the divisional round. Thank you, as always, to Bill, to everyone who's tuned in, to our producers, Kirsten Sabecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, and Tucker Tashton. I'll see you guys next week.